Thom Perez is with us. Thom Perez is the chairman of the DNC, and Chairman Perez, welcome back to the program.
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. It's always great to be with you and your listeners. I'm calling in from Brownsville, Texas, where we are standing firmly with children and their families, the unconscionable ripping apart of families by the party that purports to be the party of family values. It's illegal, it's immoral, it's inhumane, it's unconscionable, and Democrats are going to keep fighting.
That's remarkable. And you heard part of my opening rant there. I'm curious your thoughts on the Democratic Party's strategy to take on, what is inevitably going to be another right-wing crank. The billionaire class, I'm saying, has basically won. Another conversation I'd like to have with you. But do you think that the president should get a nomination for the Supreme Court while he's under active FBI criminal investigation? I can guarantee you, if Barack Obama were under active FBI criminal investigation for what may well be high crimes and misdemeanors, the Republicans would not have allowed him an appointment.
Yeah. Well, I think we should use the same standard that Mitch McConnell used in 2016. He said when you have an election year, you shouldn't have a nomination as serious as the nomination for a Supreme Court. This is a critical election year, and it's an even more important election year because it comes on the heels of an election that was obviously tainted by these, by the collusion between the Russian government and the Trump.
Right, which speaks to my investigation part. But how do Mitch McConnell controlled the Senate, so he could make up a rule and he could enforce his own rule. Mitch McConnell still controls the Senate. So how do you Democrats enforce the McConnell rule?
Yeah, I mean, we fight like hell. We organize. You mentioned two senators on the Republican side who have historically fought for women's reproductive health. I mean, this is about the Constitution. The Constitution's been taking a beating, especially in the last 2 weeks, between the Janus decision yesterday going after labor unions, and then the Muslim ban, and before that, two voting rights decisions that are going to make it easier to engage in voter suppression and women's reproductive health. We have no check and balance in the Supreme Court right now, and it's poised to potentially get even worse. And that's why this is one of these inflection points. And I've been getting calls, Tom, from friends in the last 20 hours or so who have been discouraged. And I'm saying, the hell with being discouraged. We've got to fight back. We can fight back. We've got to continue to lead with our values. We've got to articulate what we stand for. You bring forth a nominee who doesn't believe in women's reproductive health, we should be rejecting that on a bipartisan basis, because that has been a principle that has enjoyed overwhelming bipartisan support. And so we have to keep fighting. This president does have a cloud over him, and there shouldn't be a nominee considered in 2018. Unfortunately, we don't have the votes right now, and so we're going to keep fighting and articulating these principles. But we've got to fight on multiple fronts here. And for me, one of the most important fronts we've got to fight on is we've got to keep winning elections, because this may be the most important midterm election in the last century. Because if we're going to try to address the issue of the courts, if we're going to try to address the effort to require citizenship information on the census, if we're going to try to repeal what's happening here at the border with the unconscionable and illegal separation of children from their parents, if we're going to make sure we're investing in workers. At my old job at the Department of Labor, we worked hard to implement a rule that ensured that when you worked overtime, you got paid overtime, and now they overturned that. We've been working hard to expand apprenticeship, and they're moving the clock backward on that. We've got to elect Democrats this November, not only into the federal offices of the Senate and the House, but across this country, because this is a 12-year election cycle right now. The next governors that get elected, I talked to Mark Begich the other day, who's running for governor in Alaska, and their state Senate is in Republican hands. Mark Begich wins that governorship, then the Democrats will control the redistricting cycle for that state Senate. And that, the congressional seats. We now know that the Supreme Court is not going to do a damn thing about partisan or racial gerrymandering. They're enabling it.
Right.
And so what we have to do is elect governors this fall. That's why we fought like heck to help elect Ralph Northam, because he's going to be at the he's got his hand on the tiller for redistricting.
Chairman,
Same thing with Phil Murphy.
Yeah, I'm with you.
We got to do this.
Chairman Perez, I'm sorry, we're technically out of time, and I'm going to be hit with a hard break that I have no control over in about a minute and a half. So there is a fundamental principle at law that you may not judge yourself. And kind of a subsidiary to that is that you may not choose who judges you, although, there are obviously exceptions to that, but particularly from the prosecutor point of view. But there's Richard Nixon had to go before the United States Supreme Court when he refused to turn his tapes over, and they ruled against him. And Donald Trump may well, as a result of the investigations into him right now, end up before the Supreme Court saying, no, I'm not going to turn over my tax returns, or no, I'm not going to testify about what, my son did or I did or whatever, Russia, et cetera. He may well be before the Supreme Court. Might that be an argument for saying, we're going to withhold his nomination for the Supreme Court until we know whether or not the court is going to sit in judgment of him?
Well, I think there should be a number of arguments that will be made, and I've been listening, regularly to your show, and I'm glad that you're putting that out there. I think the upshot of this is we have to fight this battle on multiple fronts. We need to be making the case that this president shouldn't be entitled to a second stolen seat in the Supreme Court. This president is, under a cloud. This president, this is an election year, and the McConnell rule, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. We need to fight this on a number of fronts, and we need to understand that right now this isn't just about a fight for good jobs and good wages and health care. This is a fight for our national identity. This is about who we are as a nation.
Agreed.
And our democracy is at risk.
Chairman Perez,
we're down here.
I didn't want to let you go before asking. I understand the Democratic Party is going to get rid of superdelegates?
What we did yesterday was we took a very, I think, important step to ensure that we have the trust of the voters. We voted that on the first ballot that it will be only the pledged delegates who get to vote unless the outcome is already determined. So we're putting the control of our process squarely in the hands of the people. I think that is a really important move, and I help lead that effort. And by the way, the vote in our relevant committee was, I think it was 27-1.
That's great. That's great. Chairman Thom Perez of the Democratic Party. Thank you, sir.